They sat her at the servants' end of the table. Not unkindly. That was the thing about Amber Lynn Court. Nothing there was ever done unkindly. A footman drew the chair out for her with a small bow, and the linen was as white at that end as it was at the other, and nobody laughed, and nobody looked, and that was rather the point. Her name was Petronel Shawe. She was 41 years old. She had lived in the parish of Combe Aubrey her whole life, in a cottage with a green door and a plum tree that fruited badly, and there was not a soul in that county who had not at some hour of some bad night sent for her. They sent for her when the fever came. They sent for her when a birth turned wrong and the physician was 3 villages off at Harrow Cross and the roads were under water. They sent for her when there was a body to be washed and laid out and nobody in the house could bear to do it. She came at any hour, she came in any weather. She had a way of moving through a sick room that made the room quieter, and she never once, in 22 years, asked to be paid before she was offered. And when it was over, when the fever broke, or the child cried, or the coffin lid went on, the house closed behind her like water. That was the arrangement. She had never argued with it. There was even something restful in it, if you held it the right way up. To be needed absolutely and remembered not at all is a kind of freedom. Nobody expected anything of her but competence. Nobody asked her to be young. So when the invitation came to Amber Lynn Court, thick card, the Ledmere crest pressed into it like a thumbprint in wax, she turned it over twice at her own kitchen table and thought, well, somebody in that house is dying and they have run out of ways to say so politely. Nobody was dying. That was the strange part. The dinner was to announce a christening. The Duke of Ledmere had come home at last from London, and the boy, the heir, 2 years old and christened by nobody, because the winter had taken his mother before it could be done, and the morning had taken the year after that, the boy was to be given his name at St. Asithes on the last Sunday in September. Half the county had been asked to come and watch it happen, and Petronel Shawe had been asked too. She wore her good grey. She walked the 2 miles rather than ask anyone for a cart. And when she gave her name in the hall, the man with the list ran his finger down it and found her, and did not raise his eyes, and said, "This way, madam," and took her past the fire, past the branched candles, past 30 feet of table and 40 people who did not stop talking, to the very last chair before the door the servants used. She sat down, she put her hands in her lap. She looked up the length of that table at the Duke of Ledmere at the head of it, a lean, black-headed, ruinously polite man of 38, who had buried a wife and lost a year, and looked, from where she was sitting, like a portrait of himself. And she thought, with no bitterness at all, only the mild interest of a woman reading a page she had read before. He does not know I am here. He does not know I have ever been here. She was wrong about that. She was so wrong about that. But it took her until the last Sunday in September to find out. The Dowager Duchess of Ledmere ran that house the way a good clock runs, silently, accurately, and without any interest whatsoever in what time you would have preferred. Her name was Isolde. She was 70, upright as a cane, and she had a gift that Petronel had come to admire almost against her will. She could put a person exactly where she wanted them without ever once being rude. She did not insult. She placed. It was the Dowager who had written the list. It was the Dowager who had drawn the line somewhere around the 22nd chair between the people of the county and the people who served it. And it was the Dowager who had decided, with a small, precise stroke of the pen, on which side of that line the woman from Combe Aubrey belonged. Petronel had been at Amber Lynn Court before, twice in fact. Once when a scullery maid put her hand in boiling sugar, and once in February the year before last, but we are not going there yet, and neither was she. She ate her soup. It was very good soup. And she listened, because at that end of a table you hear everything. The servants' end is where the traffic runs. She heard that the christening was to be a great affair because the Duke had been away too long, and the county had begun to say things about a man who leaves his son with his mother and takes himself to London for a year. She heard that the Duke of Ravensmore had been asked to stand godfather and had not answered, which was very like Ravensmore. She heard that the boy, Christopher, they called him Kit, was difficult, that he screamed, that he had been through 4 nurses since Michaelmas and would not settle for any of them. And then, somewhere around the fish, she heard the Dowager say her name, not to her, about her, to a Mrs. Tarrant of Harrow Cross, 3 chairs down from the top, in the clear, carrying voice of a woman who has never in her life had to wonder whether she was being overheard. "The Shawe woman? Yes, she is here somewhere." A small pause, a small movement of the fan. "One asks her. It is only proper. The parish would notice if one did not." "She is not a guest, precisely," said Mrs. Tarrant delicately. "No," said the Dowager Duchess. "She is a service, but a christening is a public thing, and one likes the public to be complete." Petronel set down her spoon. Here is what she did not do. She did not flush. She did not stand. She did not look up the table to see whether anybody had heard it land on her. She had spent 22 years in rooms where the wrong sound at the wrong moment could undo an hour's work, and she had a stillness in her that most people mistook for meekness, and that was, in fact, the exact opposite of it. It was control. It was the most expensive thing she owned. She picked her spoon back up. She finished her soup. It was still very good soup, and she thought, and this is the whole of the woman, so hold on to it. She is not wrong. That is what I am to this house. The trouble is that she thinks that is a small thing to be. At the head of the table, the Duke of Ledmere set down his glass rather carefully and looked at the cloth in front of him for a moment and said nothing at all to anyone for some time afterwards. Nobody noticed 40 people were talking, and a man at the head of his own table, who has just heard something he cannot unhear, looks from 30 feet away exactly like a man who is bored. She would have gone home after the fish and never come back. She had every intention of it. But at 9:30, when the ladies rose, there was a sound from 3 floors up that went through that house like a wire pulled tight, a child screaming, not tantrum, not temper. The other kind, the thin, high kind that means fright. And 40 people at a long table did the thing that 40 people always do, which is to talk slightly louder. And Petronel Shawe, who could not help it, who had never once been able to help it, stood up at the servants' end of the table and went towards the stairs. By the time anybody thought to stop her, she was already gone. The nursery at Amberlin Court was at the top of the east stair, and there were 3 grown women standing in it doing absolutely nothing of any use. The boy was in the corner between the bed and the wall on the floor, rigid, with his fists in his eyes and his whole small body arched away from the room, screaming with the awful economy of a child who has been screaming for some time and has learned to breathe around it. "He does this," said the nurse. Her voice had a crack in it. "Every night this week. There's nothing to be done. He tires himself." Petronel did not answer her. She went down onto the floor, 3 feet away, and she did not touch him, and she did not speak to him, and she did not look at him. She started to hum. It was nothing. It was 4 notes. It was the sort of thing you hum when you are doing something else, the sort of noise a woman makes in a room she's not thinking about. And she did it low and flat and slightly wrong, and she picked at a loose thread on her own cuff while she did it, as though the child were the least interesting thing in that county. The screaming went on. She hummed. The nurse said something, and Petronel lifted one hand an inch off her knee, and the nurse stopped. 2 minutes. 3. The screaming got ragged, got wet, got quiet. And then the boy took his fists out of his eyes and looked at her. A fat, furious, tear-swollen, black-headed child, the very portrait of his father in miniature, and about 1,000 times more honest about it. and he said, in the clogged and ruined voice of somebody who has been shouting for an hour, "None!" And he crawled across 3 feet of nursery floor and put his forehead against her knee and went to sleep there in 90 seconds, like a man laying down a load he had carried too far. Nobody in that room said anything. Petronel Shawe sat on the floor of the ducal nursery with her hand flat on the back of a sleeping child and looked at the wall, and her face did something very quick and private that nobody saw. And then it stopped doing it. Behind her, in the doorway, the Duke of Ledmere said, "What did he call you?" She had not heard him come. She did not turn round. "Children make sounds, Your Grace," she said. "It isn't a word." There was a silence with a great deal in it. "He has not slept before 2 in the morning since I came home," said the Duke. "Then he is very tired," said Petronel Shawe. "And I would rather not wake him arguing about it." She waited for him to say something else. He did not. She heard him take a step into the room and stop. And then, after a pause that went on slightly too long to be anything but a decision, she heard him go back down the east stair without another word, quite fast, like a man leaving a room he has no business standing in, and that ought to have been the end of it. She ought to have gone home to the green door and the bad plum tree, and never been sent for again. Instead, at 10 the next morning, a boy came from the court with a note in the dowager's hand, and the note said, with a courtesy so perfect you could have shaved with it, that Miss Shawe's assistance would be welcome in the nursery until the christening, and that a suitable sum would of course be arranged, and that she should present herself at the east door. Not the hall door, the east door. Petronel read it at her own table, twice, the way she had read the invitation. Then she put on her hat and walked the 2 miles, because here is the thing that the Dowager Duchess of Ledmere, who was never wrong about people, had got wrong about this one. She thought Petronel would come for the money, or for the honour, or because the family had asked and one does not refuse the family. She came because a child in that house had said a sound at her and gone to sleep on her knee, and she knew, and she was the only person alive who did exactly why, and she was not going to tell them. 9 weeks, that was the arrangement. 9 weeks of the east door, and a small hard chair in the corner of the nursery, and a boy who followed her from window to window like a duckling. 9 weeks of the dowager passing through at 4 o'clock each day, and looking at the 2 of them with an expression like a woman checking a stopped clock. And 9 weeks of the Duke of Ledmere, who came up that east stair at 7 every evening to sit with his son for exactly 1 hour, and who could not for the life of him look at the woman in the corner for longer than a second and a half at a time. He tried at first to be a duke at her. It was what he had, and it had the great advantage of not requiring him to look at her. "You may go while I am here," he said that first evening. "Yes, Your Grace," said Petronel, and went. The boy howled the roof off. She came back. "You may sit," he said, the second evening. "There," and pointed at the hard chair in the corner without turning his head. And she sat there. And for 1 hour a man and a woman occupied the same room, and did not exchange a syllable while a child pushed a wooden horse very seriously from one end of a rug to the other. The third evening he lasted 40 minutes. "You do not talk," he said, to the window. "No, Your Grace." "Everyone talks. In this house they talk ceaselessly. My mother's dinner table sounds like a weir." "I dare say it does." "And you sit in the corner like a—" He gestured, and could not finish it, because there was no polite end to that sentence, and he had just discovered it in the middle of saying it, and Petronel Shawe watched him discover it with an interest she did not trouble to hide. "Like a chair, Your Grace," she said. "It's quite all right. I've been furniture in better rooms than this one." And the Duke of Ledmere flinched. It was very small and it was very fast, and if she had not spent 22 years reading faces by candlelight for a living, she would have missed it entirely. A man does not flinch at a joke. A man flinches at a bill he has been expecting. Then he laughed, crooked, unpractised, out of him, like a door that has swollen in its frame, and put his hand over his mouth immediately as though he had said something obscene, and the boy on the rug looked up in open amazement at the noise his father had just made. "I beg your pardon," he said. "Whatever for?" said Petronel. He looked at her properly then. First time. He held it for perhaps 3 seconds, and then he looked away again like a man putting down something hot. After that he stopped trying to be a duke at her, largely because it had stopped working, and a lean black-headed man of 38 who has not been talked to honestly in a year is an extremely easy animal to trap. He talked about the boy at first, then about the house, then about London, which he described in a way that made it sound like a very long corridor with a great many doors he had not wanted to open. "They think I ran," he said one evening, watching Kit demolish a tower of blocks with real professional malice. "The county. They think I left him with my mother and went to town because I could not bear to look at him." "Yes," said Petronel. He turned his head. "You might have lied," he said. "You'd have known." "I would," he agreed, and something in his face let go a little. "Everyone else lies. It's meant to be a kindness. It is the loneliest thing in the world, being lied to kindly for a year by everyone you have." Petronel said nothing because there was nothing to say to that which he had not already said better. "I didn't run," he said to the window. "There was business that had to be done by a man in a room in London, or this house comes down and 800 people in this county go hungry. I did it. I did it well." A pause. "But I was not here. And the county is not wrong about that part. I was not here." And Petronel Shawe, sitting in the hard chair in the corner with her hands in her lap, said carefully, in a voice she kept perfectly level, "No, you were not." He looked at her, and it went past, because he was tired, and because a thing like that only chimes if you are listening for it, and the Duke of Ledmere had spent a year training himself very hard not to listen for anything at all. He began to bring things up the east stair. A rug, because she sat on the floor with the boy and the floor was cold. Then a better chair, which she declined, and he had installed anyway, and she used because she was not a fool. Then, in the 4th week, a pot of coffee at 7 o'clock, with 2 cups on the tray too, carried up 3 flights by a Duke of England, because he had discovered that if he sent a servant with it she would not drink any. "You'll be seen," she said. "I am seen constantly," he said. "It's the great affliction of my life. Drink your coffee." She drank her coffee, and on the rug between them the boy sat in the lamplight saying "non" at intervals, quite happily, at nobody in particular, a small, fat, contented 2-syllable time bomb that neither of them, for entirely different reasons, chose to look at directly. The coach from Bath came on the 2nd Tuesday in August, and what got out of it was a handsome, kind-eyed 40-year-old widow named Mrs. Aurelia Cray, who had buried a husband, was extremely good with children, and did not know she was a weapon. That was the worst of it. She was nice. She came up to the nursery on her 2nd morning, and sat on the floor in a very good gown, and let Kit put a wooden horse in her hair, and said warmly, "You must be Miss Shawe. Her Grace says you have been an angel to them," and meant it. And Petronel liked her. That was the trap closing. The Dowager Duchess came up the east stair that same afternoon at 4:10, which she had never once done before, and stood in the doorway. "Miss Shawe, walk with me." They walked in the long gallery, where 140 years of Halloways looked down out of their frames with the particular expression of people who have never had to be interesting. "You have done very well with him," said the Dowager. "Thank you, Your Grace." "I mean it. I am not being gracious. I have never seen the point of it. 4 nurses could not do what you have done, and I am not too proud to say so." She walked on. She had a stick and did not lean on it. "Which is why I want you to understand precisely what I am about to say to you." "I generally do," said Petronel. The Dowager stopped. "My son," she said, "is a man of 38 who has buried a wife he was fond of and did not love, and who has spent a year being spoken to as if he were an invalid or an account. He is starving, and a starving man will eat whatever is nearest to hand, call it a banquet, and then one morning he will look up and see what it actually was, and he will be ashamed, not of you, of himself, and a man who is ashamed of himself is very cruel to whatever is standing next to him. A beat. I have watched it happen once in this family already. I am not fond of the memory. And Mrs. Cray, said Petronel. Is what is suitable, said the dowager. She is 40. She is kind. She is not beautiful and does not need to be. She will be here until the christening. She will be sat next to him at every meal, and she will be a great comfort to him for 30 years, and he will never once have to explain her to anybody. The stick came down very quietly on the boards. It is not romantic. It is simply the only thing in my power, and I have been doing the only thing in my power for 50 years. And I am 70, and I would rather like to finish. Petronel Shawe stood in the long gallery with her hands folded and looked at a woman she had every reason to loathe, and thought with a clarity that did her no good at all. She is not doing this to hurt me. She thinks she is being merciful. That is so much worse. You've said what he is, she said. You've said what she is. You haven't said what I am. You are the only person in the county he can speak to, said the Dowager Duchess, and that is not the same thing as being wanted, and if you cannot tell those two apart at 41, my dear, then nobody in this world has ever been kind to you, and you are about to find out how much that has cost. There was a silence in the long gallery. There will be a settlement after the christening, said the Dowager, walking on. It will be generous. You will have the cottage freehold and an income, and you will never be sent for on a wet night again as long as you live. She reached the door and stopped and did not turn round. You are to be at the church, of course. You will be seated at the back with the household, where a person in your position is seated. I am sorry. That is simply where the seat is. Yes, said Petronel. You've mentioned. I beg your pardon. At dinner, said Petronel Shawe pleasantly. You said I was a service. You said the public likes to be complete. I've a very good ear, Your Grace. It's why they send for me. And for 1 second, 1 entire second, the Dowager Duchess of Ledmere had nothing at all to say. Then she said, I see, and went out and closed the door with enormous gentleness, which is how you know it had landed. That evening he came up at 7, and she was not in the chair. She was in the vestry of St. Osyth's 2 miles off, because the altar cloth was 40 years old, and somebody had to mend it before the christening, and there was exactly 1 person in that parish who could, and it was raining, and she had walked. He found her there at 9 o'clock. He had ridden, he was soaked through, hatless, with his hair flat to his head, and he stood in the doorway of a stone room the size of a pantry, looking like a man who had lost an argument with himself somewhere around Comorbury crossroads and lost it badly. Petronel did not look up from the linen. You'll drip on it, she said. He came in. He sat down on the vestry chest, which no Duke of Ledmere had ever sat on in the history of the county, and he put his hands over his face, and then he took them away again. My mother spoke to you. She did. What did she say? She said, said Petronel, drawing the needle through, that you were starving and I was nearest, and that Mrs. Cray is suitable and kind and will be a great comfort to you for 30 years. Another stitch, level, even. She's right about Mrs. Cray. I like her. That's rather the difficulty. The rain went on outside. Petronel, said the Duke of Ledmere. The needle stopped. It stopped for perhaps a second and a half, and then it went on, and if you had not been watching her hands, you would never have known that a woman had just been broken open in a stone room by the sound of her own Christian name. Nobody had used it. That is the thing. Her mother had used it, and her mother was 30 years dead. The parish said Miss Shawe, or the Shaw woman, or in a bad hour with the sweat standing out on them. Oh, God, you came, and then in the morning, nothing at all. 22 years. She had a name, and it had simply gone out of circulation, like a coin from an old rain, still good, still gold, in nobody's pocket. "Don't," she said. "Why?" "Because you'll go back to your house tonight," she said, "and I'll go back to mine, and you'll have said it, and I'll have heard it, and one of us will have to live with that for rather a long time, and it isn't going to be you." The Duke of Ledmere stood up off the vestry chest. "Listen to me," he said. "In 9 weeks I have been told what you do by every soul in this county. You are sent for, you are steady, you are wonderful in a sick room, you are a service," I heard her say it. "I was at the head of my own table, and I heard my mother say it, and I set down my glass, and I said nothing. And I have thought about that every single night since, and I could not look at you for a month because of it, and I hope I never stop." He was not shouting. That was the worst of it. He was speaking quite quietly, the way a man does when the thing has been in him so long, it has worn itself smooth. "They keep telling me what you do. Not one of them has told me who you are." She looked up at last. "Then ask," she said. So he asked. In a vestry in the rain on a Tuesday, a Duke of England asked a 41-year-old parish woman her name, the whole of it, and where it came from, and who had given it to her, and what she had wanted at 19 before anybody had ever sent for her at 2 in the morning. And then he did the thing that no one in the county of Harrowmere had done in 22 years. He waited for the whole of the answer. She talked for an hour and 10 minutes. She had not known she had an hour and 10 minutes in her. And when she stopped, he said, "There. Now I have been told." And his voice was not steady at all, and I find I do not much care what my mother thinks I am eating. That is the moment. Everything before it was the walk up to it, and everything after it is the fall from it, and you should know, because she did not, that there were 11 days sitting between those two people in that stone room that only one of them could see. She still did not tell him. She very nearly did. It came out 4 days before the christening, and it did not come out of her. It came out of a day book. The dowager, being a woman who did nothing carelessly, had decided that a settlement of that size required a record of service, and a record of service required the household books, and so on. A Thursday morning the steward carried up a decade of Amber Court's day books and laid them on the table in the small library. And the Duke of Ledmere, who had come in only to find his mother, stood over them idly the way a man does, and turned back to the winter. February, the year before last. The bad February. He had been in London. He knew what had happened in this house that month, the way you know a thing, from a letter. The fever came through Combe Aubrey and into the court. His wife took it on the 9th and died on the 15th. His son, 10 months old, took it on the 12th and lived. Every servant who could go had gone. The physician from Harrow Cross came twice in a fortnight, and could not come oftener, because he was the only one for 40 miles, and half the county was dying at him. That was what he knew. His mother had written it to him. The boy is spared. God has been merciful. He turned the page, and there, in a housekeeper's cramped and exhausted hand, was the other version, February the 12th. Master Kit took ill in the night, no one to sit with him, sent to the village, February the 12th. A woman from the village came. That was all. That was the whole of it. No name, no wage, no note. The day books of a great house record the price of candles to a farthing, and they did not record her at all. But the entries went on, and they went on, and the Duke of Ledmere stood in his own library and read 11 days of them with the blood going out of his face. February the 13th. The woman from the village stays. February the 14th. Her Grace worse. Physician cannot come. Her Grace asked for her wedding veil to be brought up, and gave it to the woman from the village, did not say why. February the 15th. Her Grace died at 4. The woman from the village laid her out. There was no one else. February the 16th to the 22nd. Master Kit very bad. The woman from the village has not left the nursery. Cannot say when she sleeps. Candles from the nursery, 9d. February the 23rd. Fever broke in the night. Master Kit took milk this morning. February the 23rd. The woman from the village went home by the east door before the household rose, did not ask for anything. Her Grace the Dowager says she is not to be entered by name, as it will complicate the account. He stood there for a long time. Then he went and found the housekeeper, and the housekeeper, a decent woman who had been carrying it for 2 years the way you carry a stone in a shoe, told him the rest in about 90 seconds, and cried, and apologized for crying. 11 days she had walked in on the 12th of February into a house with the doors shut on it, and no physician coming, and 2 people dying in it, one of whom was a duchess, and one of whom was a baby. And nobody had asked her, and nobody had paid her, and nobody had thanked her. And on the 11th day, when the fever broke, she had put her coat on and walked home 2 miles in the dark, and never said one word about it. Not to the parish, not to the court, not to him. In 9 weeks of coffee at 7 o'clock on a tray with 2 cups, and the boy had been 10 months old. That was what took the legs out from under him in the end. 10 months old. He would not remember her. He could not remember her. There was nothing in a child that age to remember with. There had simply been one voice in that room for 11 days and 11 nights, one face, one hand, 4 flat notes, hummed over and over in the dark by a woman who was not being paid and had not been asked and was not going to be written down. And it had gone into him underneath memory, the way the first things do and set. He had not been telling his father a story. He had been telling him a sound. Every evening, from the middle of a nursery rug, for 9 weeks, not a word. The end of the only word he had. The Duke of Ledmere went up the east stair 2 at a time, and she was gone. She had gone at noon, quietly, by the east door, which was the only door she had ever been given. He rode to Combe Aubrey in the rain. He found a cottage with a green door and a plum tree in bad fruit, and there was a light in the window, and he knocked. Nobody came. He knocked again and said her name to the door, and the light did not move, and after a while he stopped knocking and simply stood there in the wet with his hand flat on the green paint, a Duke of England, hatless, on a garden path, at 10 o'clock at night, in front of a door that had been opened at 2 in the morning for every soul in that county for 22 years, and was not going to be opened for him. He stood there for 40 minutes. Then he went home. The letter reached him at 6 the next evening. It was very short, and it was, in its way, the most dignified document in the history of that county. Your Grace, you will have read the books by now. The housekeeper's face on Thursday told me you would, so I shall save you the ride. I am sorry about the door. I was standing on the other side of it. That is the honest answer, and you may do with it what you like. I did not tell you because it was not a debt. If I had told you, it would have become one, and then everything you said to me in the vestry would have been the interest on it, and I would never have known, not for 1 hour, not for the rest of my life, whether you meant it or whether you were paying. I could not have borne that. I would rather have the 9 weeks clean. Your mother will tell you I have taken advantage of a starving man. She is wrong, but she is wrong for excellent reasons, and you should be gentle with her. I sat with your wife at the end. She was not frightened. I want you to have that. It is yours, and I have kept it too long. On the 14th, she sent for her wedding veil and put it into my hands, and said that if she could not be there when he was named, he should have something of a mother's making on him, and would I see to it. So I saw to it in the nursery at night while he burned, because you cannot hum for 11 days without your hands wanting something to do. It is in the second drawer of the press in the Blue Room. It has been there for 2 years. Nobody has asked. Do not send for me. It is the one thing this county has never had to be told twice. Petronel Shawe. She went to the christening. Of course she went. Half the county was in that church, and if she had stayed away, every soul in Combe Aubrey would have known why by Tuesday, and she was not going to hand them that. She wore the good grey. She walked the 2 miles, and she sat at the back with the household where a person in her position is seated, because that, as the Dowager Duchess had explained with real regret, is simply where the seat is. St. Osyth's was full. The Duke of Ravensmore had not come, naturally. He had sent a silver cup in his compliments and a note regretting the roads, which everybody agreed was very like Ravensmore. So there was a gap at the font where a godfather ought to have stood, and the Dowager had filled it with a cousin from Harrow Cross, and Mrs. Cray sat in the second pew in a very good gown, looking gently puzzled, because she was not a stupid woman, and she had begun in the last 4 days to work something out. The boy came up the aisle in the nurse's arms. There was no mother, in a christening robe that made the front pews murmur, because it was a very beautiful thing. Old lace, worked over with small white leaves so fine you had to be close to see them at all. Somebody down the front asked where it had come from. "London," said the Dowager Duchess pleasantly. She believed it. That was the point. Nobody had asked in 2 years. Petronel Shawe sat at the back of the church and watched a dead woman's wedding veil go up the aisle in her own stitches and did not move a muscle in her face. The rector took the boy. The rector said the words, and then he said, as rectors do, "Who stands as godmother to this child?" And nothing happened. There was a pause of about 2 seconds, which in a church is a geological era. The cousin from Harrow Cross looked at the Dowager. The Dowager looked at her son. And her son, lean and black-headed and ruinously polite, who had not slept in 3 nights and had the look of a man who had finished being afraid, did not look back at her. He took a folded page out of his coat and opened it, and read it out to the roof of his own parish church in a perfectly level voice. "February the 12th, Master Kit took ill in the night. No one to sit with him. Sent to the village. A woman from the village came." He turned the page over. "February the 23rd, the woman from the village went home by the east door before the household rose. Did not ask for anything. Her Grace the Dowager says she is not to be entered by name, as it will complicate the account." He folded it up again. "Mother," he said, "would you tell the county her name?" The Dowager Duchess of Ledmere stood at the font with her stick and her 140 years of ancestors, and 400 people waited, and she said nothing at all. She said nothing for a very long time. "No," said the Duke of Ledmere, "nor did any of us." And then he crossed the room. He came down his own aisle, the whole length of it, past the Halloways in their pews and the county in its finest, past his mother in a silence you could have stood a spoon up in, and he stopped at the back, at the household pews, and he did not offer his hand, and he did not make a speech. He said, "Petronel, come to the front. You have been standing in it for 2 years. It is only that nobody could see you from where they were sitting. And I am asking here where every person who put you at the back can hear me, because you should not have to take my word for it in a room where nobody else can." And Petronel Shawe stood up. She was not weeping, let that be recorded. She was extremely calm, and her hands were perfectly steady, and she said, only just loudly enough to reach him, "I'll want it entered in the book, by name." "By name," said the Duke of Ledmere. She walked up the aisle of St. Osyth's on the last Sunday in September, with 400 people on their feet, and the boy in the rector's arms saw her coming from 30 feet away, and went off in his father's parish church like a firework, arms out, roaring with joy, shouting the sound he had been given underneath memory in the dark by a woman nobody wrote down at the top of his lungs over and over, "Non, non, non." And it was that, not the day book, not the aisle, not the Duke. It was a 2-year-old identifying his own godmother out loud in front of 400 witnesses that finished the county of Harrowmere entirely. Mrs. Tarrant of Harrow Cross had to be given a chair. At the font, Petronel drew level with the Dowager Duchess and stopped. "I have been wrong before, said Isolde Halloway, in a voice pitched for one person and cracked straight down the middle. "I have never been wrong loudly." "You'll survive it," said Petronel Shawe. "You've the constitution for it." And the Dowager Duchess, this is true, and it went round the county for 30 years, laughed out loud in church. Mrs. Aurelia Cray went back to Bath on the Tuesday from the coaching inn at Harrow Cross, having sent a christening spoon and a very kind letter. She told the story at dinner tables for the rest of her life, and she always told it well because she had been in the second pew and had seen the whole thing. They were married in that same church in the spring, which the county considered indecently quick, and attended in its entirety. There was no great settlement in the end because she would not take the freehold and she would not take the income. She took the cottage with the green door and kept it, and the plum tree went on fruiting badly for another 20 years. And every so often on a wet night somebody in Combe Aubrey would still hammer on that green door at 2 in the morning and find nobody home and have to go up to the court instead, where the Duchess of Ledmere would come down the front stairs in her coat with her bag and go out into the weather because she had never once been able to help it and did not intend to start. She came down the front stairs. That was the part the county could not get over. Not the marriage, the stairs. The Dowager lived another 9 years. She and Petronel got on eventually in the way of two women who are both entirely uninterested in being gracious. She left her, in her will, one line: "To my son's wife, my apology, which she does not need, and my pearls, which she does not want. She will know what to do with both." And the christening robe went back into the second drawer of the press in the blue room, folded in paper with a note pinned to it in the Duke's own hand, which the housekeeper found long afterwards and could not for the life of her understand. It said, "Made in this house, by name, now. Here is the thing to take with you, and then you may sleep." At the beginning of all this a woman walked 2 miles in her good grey dress and gave her name at a great door, and a man ran his finger down a list and did not raise his eyes, and she was walked past the fire and the candles and 30 feet of table to the last chair before the door the servants used, and she sat down and she put her hands in her lap, and nobody looked at her. She was at that moment the only person in that entire house who had ever saved a life in it. That is the whole of it. That is what the room could not see, not because she hid, she never hid. She was sitting right there, in the light, for 9 weeks in the corner, on a hard chair, but because a room decides what a person is on the way in, and then it stops looking. The rooms are wrong more often than you would think. They were wrong about her for 22 years in the plainest possible sight, and it did not make her 1 ounce less than she was. It only meant that on the last Sunday in September, when a man finally turned round and looked all the way to the back, there was somebody there worth crossing a church for. There was always somebody there. If you're listening tonight, I'd love to know where in the world you are. Tell me in the comments. This story has a habit of travelling, and I like to see how far, and if you'd like another, there's one waiting, a woman in a spa town who was invited 9 seasons running and asked to dance in none of them. Good night. The right eyes always find the quiet ones in the end. Yours are out there still. I'll have another story ready when you are.